SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
Comfort Moodian භාගයයි කලක් පවතින අලුත් පෙනුමයි.
Tonight, security lapse. Catholic Church spokesperson critiques false attack alarm mistake and calls for thorough probe. Seek the truth. Health experts urge parents to speak to their doctors on child vaccinations rather than fall prey to misleading facts.
So there are a lot of myths parents think about, and this we have to bust these myths also.
So when there's anxiety, we know an entity called mass hysteria. One person shares some negative information about a vaccine, and within minutes, 1,000 parents are sharing it.
Keep it safe. The President confirms the planned lifting of the curfew on the 1st of October as medical professionals call for some restrictions to stay.
We need to continue with the closure or the indoor dining and drinking in restaurants and bars to be disallowed.
Digital doldrums. Sri Lanka's UNICEF representative says the government's school reopening is the right way to go.
Children need to be, to the extent possible, in an environment where they are with their peers, with their friends and with their teachers, because it's not only about the academics, it's also about the social interaction. That's extremely important.
All this and much more coming up on this Wednesday, the 29th of September 2021.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයිෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando in your top stories for tonight. With the subject of child vaccinations and huge issues among parents concerned about the possibility of side effects on their kids, many different opinions on the issue remain a key problem in convincing them of expert opinions on the matter. In discussion with Indivari Amuwatta on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, consultant pediatrician Dr. Surantha Pereira says that doctors need to engage with parents more and try to allay their concerns. Meanwhile, consultant psychiatrist Dr. Muru Chandradasa says that mass hysteria is to be blamed for the situation caused by unverified facts being subscribed to by parents instead of them trusting the science.
There are many schools of thought on the issue of vaccinating children across the world. The most pressing concern so far, however, in the minds of parents today is whether vaccines pose a bigger threat to the health and safety of their kids than the actual COVID-19 virus. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says that more evidence is needed on the subject to be able to make a general recommendation. However, currently experts are also drawing attention to the growing dangers of unverified information being subscribed to by parents on vaccines, adding that doctors must play a big role in busting these myths.
But looking at the children itself, because our topic today to talk more about children and their psychological, mental issues as well as their requirements. How do you think the government and health professionals should approach this, especially in creating awareness? Because this fear is also derived with the lack of awareness and understanding among the parents as well as the population. How do you think we should address these issues?
Now, if we look at everything at this cross-section of the time, we have covered quite a number of population at this point of time. We did not believe at the initial stages whether we can vaccinate 50% of the population so sooner. Anyway, we have done it. That's a fantastic job. And then at this point, we have covered most of the elderly population. We have covered most of the population between 18 and 65 who have comorbidities, and we have covered most of the population above 30 years also. Between 20 and 30, there is a little bit of reluctance getting vaccines. You know, the young crowd try to choose vaccines. Some people feel like better to get Pfizer vaccine. I think there is no rationality selecting vaccines. all vaccines are equal. At the end game, they prevent death and significant illnesses. So there are a lot of myths parents think about, and this we have to bust these myths also. So that as professionals, when they come to get treatment, we must use that opportunity to ask few questions. How is your child? Do you have any concerns? How is the behavior? And do you have any issues regarding the vaccination? And then we must take few minutes to address these things.
Meanwhile, speaking on the issue of dealing with vaccine anxiety, consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist Dr. Meru Chandradasa says that the issue lies with mass hysteria caused by the sharing of unverified and negative facts on vaccines. However, there could, he adds, be other underlying issues that adults are going through right now due to the constant bad news they're exposed to on a daily basis.
These vaccines, we know very little about them. WHO itself says there is more research that is needed. At the same time, there are anxieties built upon these vaccines, whether we need them or not. And here we are also trying to understand the parents' opinion of requiring vaccines for their children because of the fear of this pandemic.
So for example, when we say we need to vaccinate the children, there's obviously anxiety among the parents because this is a new thing. So when there's anxiety, we know an entity called mass hysteria. So one person shares some negative information about a vaccine, and that is shared in the social media, and within minutes 1,000 parents are sharing it. When you are in a COVID mental health crisis, we tend to have what we call the negative attentional bias. That is, if we listen to the news, because we are under this pandemic, we mainly focus on the number of deaths, number of positives, but we are forgetting all the positives. For example, like children learning to use online education, children learning to use new methods of learning. All those positives are forgotten, and the negatives are given more consideration because of the negative attentional bias. So about vaccinations, Sri Lanka College of Pediatricians, as Dr. Surantha mentioned, have clearly encouraged that, and they are just taking decisions to go ahead with that, and they will give the timeline soon. For the parents, I have to tell it that is, when medical professionals are coming to a decision, we are considering all the evidence around the world.
UNICEF has lauded Sri Lanka's plans to reopen schools, calling it a much-needed move to ensure kids have a better, more equal education with physical, social interactions, a crucial factor in development. UNICEF representative Christian Skoog says that schools can be safely reopened as evidence has not shown schools to be a driver of community infections.
UNICEF representative in Sri Lanka, Christian Skoog, says that the country's focus on reopening schools is the right way to go, adding that evidence from other countries' experiments in the process has not shown schools to be a driver of community infections.
First of all, the education hasn't stopped. I think the government has done a very good job in trying to continue education even if schools were closed. The biggest step will be to reopen schools. That is the most important. Children need to be, to the extent possible, in an environment where they are with their peers, with their friends and with their teachers, because it's not only about the academics, it's also about the social interaction. That's extremely important. Evidence around the world shows clearly that schools are not a driver of transmission of the virus in a community, and they have been quite safe spaces compared to many other spaces. But of course we need to make sure that the schools are safe enough, that all the measures are taken in each particular school so that children can go back and interact and benefit from in-presence learning.
Skoog adds that although digitalization may be a good thing, having kids physically attend school is the only way right now that gaps in online education can be plugged, as current data shows that 69% of households complain of a not very positive change.
In Sri Lanka, as in many countries, there are gaps and differences in learning opportunities. These have been accentuated during the time of COVID. We see that the possibility to continue to learn at an adequate level has been hampered, particularly, as you say, in the more vulnerable or remote areas where particularly internet connection is not assured. The government is prioritizing those smaller schools, and they tend to be in rural areas, in poorer areas, so that will help in equalizing a bit the possibility of quality learning. But I think that the continued support of better quality distance learning is important, but at the same time trying to get kids back into school so that we don't widen the gaps any further. In Sri Lanka, 69% of households with children report that their children are learning less or a lot less than they were pre-pandemic, and poor households, the more disadvantaged households, are more affected.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has ordered the lifting of the ongoing quarantine curfew at 4 a.m. on the 1st of October. The guidelines to be implemented following the move are to be announced tomorrow. In the meantime, the Sri Lanka Medical Association wants some of the restrictions to continue to avoid another massive outbreak of COVID-19.
With rising Delta variant numbers in the lead up to the month of August, the government declared an island-wide quarantine curfew to contain the virus spread. During the period of 1 month, however, significant improvements were seen in new cases and deaths. For example, when the curfew was imposed on the 20th of August, the daily COVID-19 caseload remained above 4,000. However, as of last evening, this had dropped to 932 cases detected across the country. Further, health experts are now highlighting a significant drop in oxygen requirement as a result. With Sri Lanka now seeing such gains, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has officially confirmed the lifting of the curfew at 4 a.m. on the 1st of October. However, interprovincial travel restrictions will continue further.
President informed that the quarantine curfew to be lifted and the health guidelines and other travel restrictions that will be enforced after 1st of October will be notified by tomorrow by the health and the respective authorities.
Meanwhile, the Sri Lanka Medical Association says that it shouldn't be a complete lifting of all restrictions. Accordingly, they call for restrictions to remain on weddings, parties, conferences and political gatherings in closed air-conditioned environments for a little while longer.
We need to continue with the closure or the indoor dining and drinking in restaurants and bars to be disallowed, and spas and saloons to remain closed for at least for another 1 month.
However, the SLMA also says that the signs are positive for the reopening of schools as long as it is done in adherence to health and safety protocols.
It's the time for us to open schools with the adequate restrictions, at least 50% of the children to come on every other day, and for the other 50% to join from home online with the class.
In the meantime, the Ministry of Health announced 770 more COVID-19 recoveries during the day. This brings the total number of COVID-19 recoveries in the island to 456,857.
Director General of Health Services Dr. Asela Gunawardena announced the categories of people to which booster doses and a third dose will be given as per the guidelines of the Advisory Committee on Communicable Diseases. He also said that the Pfizer vaccine will be administered for this purpose. Most people believe that booster vaccinations and third doses are the same thing. However, that may not be the case. Sri Lanka's top health official Dr. Asela Gunawardena says that the difference lies in the time gap between their administration. Accordingly, a third shot is administered just a month after obtaining the first and second vaccine doses, while the booster dose is given 6 months after the second shot. In the global context, countries such as the United States, Russia and Israel have commenced booster vaccinations among their populations. However, the World Health Organization has called for a moratorium on boosters in a bid to ensure that the vulnerable nations can get access to their vaccine needs. But Sri Lanka, that has procured enough vaccines for its population, is now planning to offer a third and a booster shot targeting several groups. Speaking at a media briefing, the Director General of Health Services announced some of the guidelines provided by the Health Ministry's Advisory Committee on Communicable Diseases and revealed the categories in which the booster as well as the third shot will be administered.
Booster dose එකයි තුන්වෙනි මාත්‍රාවයි කියන්නේ දෙකක්. ඒ සඳහා වුන් අපිට නිර්ණායකයන් ලබා දුන්නා. අවුරුදු වැඩට සියලුම ජනතාවට තව බූස්ටර් ඩෝස් එකක් ලබා දෙන්න ඕන තීරණය කළා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම අවුරුදු 60 37 අතර ආබාධිත වලින් නැත්නම් ලෙඩ රෝග වලින් පෙළෙන අයට බූස්ටර් ඩෝස් එකක් ලබා දෙන්න ඕන නියම කරා. එම ලෙඩ රෝග මොනවාද කියන එක අපි ඉදිරියේදී ප්‍රකාශයටපත් කරන්න උදානම් වෙනවා. ඊට අමතරව පිළිකා නැත්නම් වකුගඩු රෝග වලින් නැත්නම් වකුගඩු බද්ධ කරලා තියෙන නැත්නම් අපගේ ප්‍රතිශක්තිකරණ අඩු වෙන අඩු වෙච්ච නැත්නම් ඒ සඳහා ඖෂධ ගන්න අයට අපි තුන්වෙනි මාත්‍රාව ලබා දෙන්න ඕන අපිට අනුමැතිය ලබා දුන්නා. ඊට අමතරව සෞඛ්‍ය කාර්ය මණ්ඩල වලට සහ අනිකුත් ෆ්‍රන්ට්ලයින් වර්කර්ස්ලට බූස්ටර් ඩෝස් එකක් ලබා දෙන්නත් ඕන අනුමැතිය අපිට ලබා දුන්නා. මෙම කාණ්ඩ 4ට අවශ්‍ය ෆයිසර් මාත්‍රාව තමයි අපි දැන් ෆයිසර් එන්න තමයි අපි දෙන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ.
The Director General of Health Services also added that inoculations for these categories will begin once their inoculation data is finalized.
දැනට ACCD එකෙන් අපිට අනුමැතිය ලබා දුන්නේ ඔය මම කියපු කාණ්ඩ 4ට පමණයි. අනාගතයේදී එම අවශ්‍යතාවයක් වුණොත් සියලුම මහ ජනතාවට ඒක ඕන් විසින් අපිට ලබා දෙයි කියලා අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා.
As of last evening, 14,471,052 persons have been inoculated against COVID-19, which amounts to 64% of the total population. Of that number, 11,700,763 have obtained both vaccine doses, meaning 53% of the population have been completely inoculated against the virus. More news on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
Big 3.
Welcome back in more news. Several churches went into a state of shock after a group of Navy officers walked in and informed the parish priests and staff members of an impending attack. Later, it transpired that the message was a mistake, which was acknowledged by the Navy, according to church sources. Speaking on the matter, former director of the National Catholic Centre for Social Communications, Reverend Father Cyril Garmini, criticized the national security of the country being taken lightly, while stressing upon the government to conduct a probe into the matter. Several churches across the country were visited by a group of naval officers yesterday who had cautioned the respective parish priests and some parish staff about an impending attack. At St. Nicholas Church in Bopitia Jaila, naval personnel had arrived when the parish priest was away and had conveyed what was at the time an emergency message to a member of the working staff. The sailors had cautioned that suspects may come in disguise such as that of a priest and instructed them to be vigilant. Speaking to AdaDerana, the parish priest of St. Nicholas Church, Bopitia, says no measures were taken to provide security after the warning.
යාලා ඉස්සෙල්ලා කරන්න ඕනේ මේවට කවුරු හරි ආරක්ෂකංශය දාන එක. වචනෙන් කියනකට වඩා යාලා ක්‍රියාවට නංවල යන්න ඕනේ. එතකොට බය නෑ අපිට. ආරක්ෂාව මේ වෙනකන් දීලා නෑ.
Meanwhile, convening a media briefing today, former director of the National Catholic Centre for Social Communications, Reverend Father Cyril Garmini, criticized authorities for taking a matter concerning the national security so lightly.
දැන් මේ පණිවිඩය වැලිගම්පිටිය, වත්තල, බෝපිටිය, රාගම වගේ දේවස්ථාන කීපයකටම දැනුම් දීලා තියෙනවා. නාවික හමුදාව සහ ආරක්ෂක අමාත්‍යාංශය සඳහන් කරන්නේ මේක වැරදීමකින් සිද්ධ වෙච්ච දෙයක්. මේ පිළිබඳව ඒ අය කනගාටුව පළ කරනවා කියලා තියෙනවා. දැන් අපේ ප්‍රශ්නය තමයි මේ විදිහේ බැරෑරුම් තොරතුරක්. එතකොට මේ තොරතුර කියලා ඊට පස්සේ කියනවා නම් මේක වැරදීමකින් සිදු වෙච්ච දෙයක් කියලා ලොකු ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා ජාතික ආරක්ෂාව පිළිබඳව. අපි කාගෙත් ආරක්ෂාව පිළිබඳව. මේකද ජාතික ආරක්ෂාව වගේ තාමත්ම බැරෑරුම් කාර්යභාරයකදී සිදුවිය යුතු දේ. දේවස්ථාන කීපයකට ගිහිල්ලා විතරක් මේ තොරතුර කියලා එනකොට ඒතර ප්‍රශ්නයක් එනවනේ එහෙනම් ඒ දේවස්ථාන වලට විතරද මේ ප්‍රහාරයේ අනතුර තියෙන්නේ? ප්‍රහාරයක් එල්ලවීමේ පොදු අනතුරක් තියෙනවා නම් එහෙමනම් කළ යුතුව තියෙන්නේ ආරක්ෂක අමාත්‍යාංශය හරි එහෙම නැත්නම් බුද්ධ්‍යාංශය හරි නිල වශයෙන් වගකීම දරන්නට පුළුවන් කෙනෙක් අතියුතුම් කාදිනල් හිමිපාණන්ට මේ පිළිබඳව නිල වශයෙන් දැනුම් දෙන එක. එතකොට හැම දේවස්ථානයකම ඊට පස්සේ අවශ්‍ය නම් පොලිසියේ ආරක්ෂාව හෝ හමුදා ආරක්ෂාව හෝ යොදන්නට පුළුවන්.
Reverend Father Fernando then called on the government to ensure that such mistakes do not repeat in the future.
දැන් මේ විදියට ඇවිල්ලා කියලා ඊට පස්සේ කියනවා මේක වැරදීමකින් වුණා කියලා. ඒතර ඊළඟ දවසේ ඇවිල්ලා කිව්වම අපි කොහොමද විශ්වාස කරන්නේ මේක ඇත්තටම සත්‍ය තොරතුරක් කියලා. ඒ නිසා එහෙම වැරදීම් සිදු කරන්නට එපා කියන එක අපි තාමත්ම අවධාරණයෙන් ඉල්ලා සිටින්නට කැමැති රජයෙන්.
Following yesterday's incidents, the news spread faster than wildfire on social media, with many stating that the country could see another terrorist attack on its churches. However, issuing a statement in this regard, the Ministry of Defence said that information of an impending attack on the churches of this country have not been analysed or confirmed by relevant authorities. Therefore, it urged the public not to be alarmed by such news circulating on social and electronic media. In a bid to reopen the country for tourism and to ensure the ease of travelling to Sri Lanka, the Ministry of Health has issued a new set of guidelines on quarantine measures for travellers arriving from overseas. As per the statement, travellers who have completed 14 days after being fully vaccinated and have a negative PCR report within 72 hours prior to departure will no longer need an on-arrival PCR test, as they will be released from the airport. A new set of guidelines on quarantine measures for travellers arriving from overseas were issued yesterday, signed by the Director General of Health, Dr. Asela Gunawardena.
New guidelines to handle the persons arriving at the Katnayaka International Airport has been now released. The main aim of issuing this circular is to ensure that those who are arriving in Sri Lanka after getting the full vaccine coverage and those who have followed the specific period of time after getting the required doses of vaccination need to be released from the airport with minimal inconvenience.
Accordingly, Sri Lankan citizens, seafarers as well as dual citizens who are using Sri Lankan passports to arrive in the country will no longer require prior approval from the Foreign Ministry and the Civil Aviation Authority to arrive in the island. However, dual citizens using a foreign passport to land in Sri Lanka should get prior approval from the Foreign Ministry and the Civil Aviation Authority only if they don't arrive through Sri Lanka tourism. Further, tourists and foreign nationals, including valid resident visa holders, dual citizens and Sri Lankan citizens have been instructed to obtain electronic travel authorization via the Sri Lanka tourism website to undergo quarantine procedure at a level 1 safe and secure certified hotel. As for foreign nationals without a valid visa, including valid resident visa holders, they are now expected to obtain a landing permit or a visa from the Department of Immigration and Immigration prior to their departure. Diplomats and foreign national staffers and accompanying family members are allowed to quarantine at a hotel or a residence approved by the Area Medical Officer of Health. If they are undergoing quarantine at a residence, they are asked to take prior approval from the area MOH on whether the residence is suitable for mandatory quarantine. The new guidelines also point out that it is mandatory for all travellers aged 2 years and above to produce a negative PCR report, provided that it's taken within 72 hours prior to embarkation. Meanwhile, travellers with a history of COVID-19 infection during the past 2 months are also allowed to arrive in the country, however with a negative rapid antigen test report conducted within 48 hours prior to landing. The DG Health Services states that all passengers who have received the recommended doses of a COVID-19 vaccine to carry the original vaccination certificate or card. Meanwhile, Deputy Director General of Education and Research at the Ministry of Health added that guidelines with regard to testing process of the returnees from Middle East will be issued soon.
PCR test performed on the persons who are coming from Middle East returnees. Again, the Health Ministry will publish the specific guidelines in the coming days.
A software engineer was arrested by the CID yesterday over the data deletion from the National Medicines Regulatory Authority database. After producing him in court today, the Colombo magistrate ordered the suspect to be remanded until the 6th of October.
A software engineer attached to Epic Lanka Technologies, the company tasked with maintaining the database of the National Medicines Regulatory Authority, was arrested last evening over the data deletion issue. The 34-year-old was produced before the Colombo magistrate today by the officer in charge of the Digital Forensic Lab. Representing the CID, Deputy Solicitor General Dileepa Piris said that the engineer had intentionally deleted the data based on the needs of a pharmaceutical racketeer. He added that the engineer's activities for 7 hours from 3:47 am until 10:29 am on the 9th of July, after entering the database through his mobile phone, was highly suspicious. He also stated that the NMRA had informed the company of its inability to enter into the database, and then the tech company had assigned this engineer to look into the matter. According to Piris, the engineer had later notified the office that the data was mistakenly deleted by him during the process of fixing the issue. The Deputy Solicitor General added that the history too had been deleted and questioned the need to delete the only evidence that could have proven his mistaken deletion. He also said that the data in such a database cannot be erased with just one click of the delete button as well. Deputy Solicitor General Piris also pointed out that the engineer had committed the crime after having already handed over his resignation to the company. After considering the facts, the additional magistrate ordered the suspect to be remanded until the 6th of October.
We return after the short commercial break. Do stay with us. Welcome back in business news. Last week, the Cost of Living Committee instructed the Customs Department to release up to 400 containers of essential food items left uncleared at the Colombo port. The containers had been languishing at the port due to difficulties faced by importers in purchasing the necessary foreign exchange to pay for them. In a further move to assist this move, it was confirmed by Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral to First at 9 that the bank plans to inject a total of $50 million into the market for shippers to settle their dues. This measure is set to provide some relief to the country's importers and also ease current shortages of essential goods in the country. Meanwhile, Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral will be unveiling a new economic plan titled the 6-month Roadmap for Ensuring Macroeconomic and Financial System Stability this Friday. The governor's presentation is set to be live streamed on social media. Sri Lankan shares closed at a record high today, marking a positive finish for a 6th straight session as consumer staple stocks boosted the benchmark index. The CSE Old Share Price Index ended 0.1% higher at 9,433.77 points, while the S&P SL20 climbed 1.7% or 60 points to end at 3,504.14 points. On that note, here's Demantha Matthew with today's market report.
Today also we saw the run in the stock market continue for the 6th consecutive day as the index climbed by 94 points, continuing to register new all-time highs on a daily basis, as we have today seen the index crossing 9,400 levels to close at 9,433 points. So overall we saw the S&P SL20 also climbing by 67 points to close at 3,511 points, so surpassing the important 3,500 levels as well. So with that, the turnover levels continuing to be around the 6 billion mark, today registering just marginally below 6 billion, and the number of transactions continuing to be high above the 30,000 range at 35,000 transactions for the day.
The Sri Lankan rupee remained unchanged at 202 rupees and 99 cents against the US dollar today. Now let's have a look at how the rupee fared against other major currencies during the day. With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.